Okay, today, in honor of it just being Yitzhak Kislev and Chav Kislev, we are going forward to the beginning, from chapter 1 of Tanya. So, as a famous rabbi once said, before I speak, I like to say a few words. So, a little background here. Somebody once asked, why did the Alter Rebbe write Tanya? Now, the Alter Rebbe tells us why he wrote Tanya. And he says, people are coming to him with questions. And has always been historically our practice amongst the Jewish people that we don't only call the rabbi when we put chicken soup in the cereal bowl, and we're not sure what to do about that, but also when we have meaningful, personal, deep questions about our understanding of our purpose here in this world, and when we're feeling connected or disconnected, or we want to feel more connected and a more passionate, closer relationship with Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe describes that people were coming to him, and Ein Hazman Grum was just not enough time to deal with each person. And it's, you're talking about late 1700s in Russia. It's very hard to travel and to get from place to place, and very difficult to respond to everybody and meet with everybody. So the Alter Rebbe takes this very radical move to write it down in a book, and then to publish it, and then to distribute it. And this is understood to be the first writing down, the first actually pen to paper available to everybody. Now, the drawbacks of putting it in a book versus speaking with somebody personally are, rather self-evident. You don't get the back and forth. You don't see if the person understands it. Anyone pulls it off a shelf, sits in it by themselves and reads it. They don't have anyone to ask a question to. And there's a lot of vulnerability for a lot of misunderstanding. And so, as it's often described, the Alter Rebbe poured over every word. And there are times, and we'll point them out as we go through it, where the Alter Rebbe added a vav between two words. And before he did that, he reviewed the entire Tanya. And he took that risk. And still, once it was put out, it was easily misunderstood, deliberately misunderstood. People didn't see where it was coming from, what its purpose was. And if they potentially dismissed it, or worse, they potentially distorted it or just misunderstood what it was saying. And it led to a big mess that ultimately resulted in large part with the Alter Rebbe being arrested and threatened with the end of his life by the Tsar until he was miraculously released, that we just celebrated on the 19th of Kislev. But what is it? What is the questions? And why would we assume that we here, living in clearly a very different environment in the United States in 2024, compared to people living in Tsarist Russia in the late 1700s? And since, as the Alter Rebbe says, the Tanya is a response to the people of his time who were coming to him, so what does that have to do? Yes, of course, we'll find some parallel. But we know, for example, the Rambam also wrote a great work of what we would call philosophy, that is a message, the Guide to the Perplexed, and he was dealing with a very specific type of circumstance in his time, almost 900 years ago at this point, or so. He's dealing with people who were enamored with the scientific discoveries of the day. So if I happen to find that to be my challenge, maybe I'll find some meaning in the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim. What if that's not my particular challenge? Well, then maybe that doesn't appeal to me. Why is it that we assume that Tanya is going to appeal to everybody? And so it is explained that when we ask the question, sort of, what is the question that the Alter Rebbe is trying to address? What are these questions? We're not just talking about this specific question this specific person asked. What is the question that the Alter Rebbe is trying to address? And it is explained, as we'll see it in Tanya, that the Alter Rebbe is trying to address the question of the person who comes and says, what makes me different than my Gentile neighbor? What's the difference? Everybody's got a philosophy and everybody's got a belief system, and some people are very intense about it, and some people are not so intense about it, and some people take it very seriously, other people not so seriously. What is distinctive? What does it mean to be a Jew? What does that mean? That we have a faith, and we have a culture, and we have a history, and other people they have their faith, and they have their culture, and they have their history, and we think ours is the best, and they think theirs is the best, or we're much more sort of genteel about it. We say, well, this one is good for me, and that's good for you. What is the difference? And so the Alter Rebbe's basic answer, which we will see in the second chapter, is that a Jew is a spiritually distinctive species from a Gentile. It's not because we can read Hebrew, and it's not because of our ancestry, and it's not because even of our practice, because we observe the mitzvahs and so on. It is something innate about a Jew that they have a second aspect to themselves beyond their humanity. We are not only human. Our humanity, we share in common with the nations. Our distinctive characteristic is that we have a godly soul, an actual part of unadulterated, unminimized, undimmed godliness, this nefesh Hashemis, a second soul, which is an actual part of Hashem. In contrast, even to angels and to the other humans, and of course, the less developed life forms, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, uh, the mineral, where its godliness is extraordinarily muted, we have this raw godliness. Well, then the question becomes, so how come I still like things that are not so godly? So if that's the case, that I have this actual godliness within me, how come I still like to be lazy, indulgent, sloppy, impatient, whatever it is, each person with their own challenge. So why? I got this godly soul. So the Alter Rebbe says, well, it's one soul. You got two souls. And as the analogy which the Alter Rebbe quotes from a couple of weeks ago in the Parsha, that when Rivka Imenu was pregnant and the children struggle within, and she asks Hashem, Lama zeh anochi, what is this? I thought, so to speak, now that I'm from, meaning now that I'm no longer with my father Besuel, who's a bad guy, and my brother Lavan, who's a bad guy, but now I'm married to Yitzchak and I live in the house of Avram, that everything's going to be fine. So Hashem says, well, you have two souls. You also have Esav within you. You also have your humanity. And your humanity is driven by the sensory stimulation, some form of what's in it for me. So whereas the godly soul is primarily driven, not only primarily, is absolutely driven by its desire to be in alignment with Hashem, the animating, or animal, but animating, a little softer term, soul, that is, that makes me human, is driven by some form of what's in it for me. It doesn't have to be evil, just as animals are not evil. They never violate their purpose. But it's driven by self-preservation at some level. What's meaningful to me, what's important to me, what's inspiring to me, what's transformative to me. Some form of how does it make my life better? Oh, well, I got a competition now between the godly soul that wants transcendent service of the infinite and the animating soul, which wants some form of, again, self-satisfaction. Oh, well, what do I do about that? Oh, funny you should ask. Here's 53 chapters as to what to do about it. So now that we understand what the battle is, now we understand what the question is. The question is, what makes me different than everybody else? Answer, you have a godly soul that's distinctive, and that's independent of whether it ever manifests itself in any conscious manner. Again, we're not Jewish because we do mitzvahs. And then we say, but how come I have all these impulses for all these things that I like to do, whatever it is? Because I have an animating soul that's driving itself to some form again of what's in it for me. So what am I supposed to do about it? This is the book of Tanya. What are we? It is strategies and tactics designed for a pragmatic way of how we manifest our godly soul to be the driving force of our behavior, which includes what we consciously, willfully think about, not maybe what passes through my field of vision, but what I voluntarily decide to fixate on, certainly what I say out loud and what I do. And that's the goal of Tanya. Now, historically, what we call the Tanya, this big book, is really a couple of different books that are put together. There is the Sefer Shel Beinoni, the book of the intermediate man. There is the Shara Yichud V'Amunah, the gateway into the oneness and the belief in Hashem. There is a series of letters about the concept of tshuva, and there is, at the end, a series of letters which the Alter Rebbe wrote to different communities or different people that his sons later decided to add as an addendum to this book that we simply call Tanya, which speak about issues that are beyond the personal. Now, historically, the Alter Rebbe wrote the Shara Yichud V'Amunah before he wrote the Book of the Intermediate Man, what we would refer to as the second section of Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe speaks about what we truly mean with the oneness of Hashem. Just in brief, when we say Hashem is one, we don't only mean there's one God, like there's one pencil on the table. We mean that God is one with everything. So when people would argue, well, what's the difference between this guy says there's 10 gods, 9, 8, 7, you just have one. So what's the difference? The idea is it's not just there's one God, but God is one with everything. And how could God be one with everything when I certainly seem like I exist on my own? I certainly perceive the physical world as having reality. So what do we truly mean when there is one? And that's those chapters. Now, the Alter Rebbe, as I said, wrote that first. And his initial intention was he's going to publish that first. And the theory was, how can I expect people to have a meaningful relationship with Hashem if they don't even know who Hashem is? But then the Alter Rebbe zigged instead of zagged. And he said, no, we are so eager and it's so necessary for people to have a series of what I call strategies and tactics for having a meaningful relationship with Hashem, that even if they don't yet exactly know who Hashem is, they don't yet have a nuanced, personal, academic understanding of God, it's still absolutely necessary, because we can't wait, that we publish the Sefer Shel Beinoni first. So again, down the line, you'll note that in the book called Shara Yichud V'Amunah, the Alter Rebbe refers to ideas which are discussed in the Book of the Intermediate Man in the future tense. He says, as I will explain. We're like, what do you mean? We read that one already. Well, that's based on that initial strategy. There is a lot of hesitation that the Alter Rebbe had and all the leaders before him about publishing this, again, based on as we described. Because when you publish something, it's now out in the general public. And what if somebody picks it up and they don't have a teacher and they don't have someone with them? So much so that in the introduction, the Alter Rebbe appeals to sort of the elders of every town that don't be so humble and shy and don't conduct yourself in this sort of semi-false sense of humility. And if people come to you for explanation, share it with them. You know, it's like if a person is a doctor and he has the capacity to save a life, he's going to, someone's died. So, well, who am I? And I'm so humble. Don't be so humble. Go and save the person's life. Because again, this was a tremendous risk. There's a story oft quoted about the Alter Rebbe himself when he was a student by his teacher, who was Reb Dov Ber, known as the Magid, from the town of Mizrich. It's a town. I mean, it's barely even a little tiny shtetl. So one day, him and his colleagues noticed that someone had some writings from the Magid, but they had been discarded and they were, laying on the street, and they were very sort of shaken by this, not just because the siddur fell on the floor, but they saw this as somewhat of a metaphor that perhaps we're being a little too loose with these great teachings. We're talking about subtle things. And when we talk about subtle godly things and people don't treat them with reverence, they become easily disregarded, undervalued, even disrespected, and so on. And so maybe they thought we're getting a little too casual with how with the reverence for these ideas. And so they sat down to discuss it. And the Alter Rebbe, again, at that time he was a student, he gave a sort of the following analogy, metaphor, as to why there is still a value. So it's one of the king metaphors. Every Jewish metaphor is either a king or a tailor. Once upon a time, there was a king, and this king had a beloved son, and the son got sick. And they, of course, called every possible doctor they could find, but there was no help. And this one, and the kid, he got sicker and sicker and sicker. And finally, they found one doctor who had an idea, a maybe this would work. What should they do? So the doctor said, the king has a crown, and this crown is not just his personal headpiece, but it's the representation of the entirety of his monarchy from generations ago, and it embodies the entirety, the sort of the representation of its of his kingdom and of his country and of his family. And what makes this crown so particularly meaningful is that in the center there is this jewel that is the sort of unique, distinctive aspect of this family. So the doctor said if we took this jewel out and we crushed it up and ruined it, and we put it in the prince's mouth, maybe it will revive him. Well, everybody was pretty hesitant, and they said, "Well, can't we find something else?" And this is the whole meaning, and so on, and it's going to be ruined. But unfortunately, the longer they waited, the sicker the prince became, until he was so sick that his mouth was clenched. So even if they would try this, they couldn't be certain that even a few drops would fall into his mouth. But the doctor was sure that if they did, it would cure the prince. Well, any parent can imagine. Eventually, of course, they said, do it, because there's nothing more precious than the child. So what is the analogy? The analogy is the Jewish people have been through some rough times. And here we're talking, the Alter Rebbe is writing Tanya in the late 1700s. And this story when he was a student a little earlier in the 1700s. And we've had some pretty rough times since then. And the rough times are not only, not that it's not enough, but not only have they been very physical, human rough times, we've had some very rough spiritual times, times when we were genuinely bereft of any sense that Hashem was watching over us. And yet we have been absolutely committed to the service of Hashem. But there's something more than just the execution of mitzvahs. Remember, in the late 1700s in Russia, there was no such thing as being, quote, what we would call today, not religious, because you had to belong to a community. Many of the oppressions against the Jewish people were because the local governments, whether it was Russia or Poland or Hungary, I mean, not that they were nice people, but they expected everybody to belong to something. Everybody had to be in a category. So there was no such thing as being what we would call today not religious. I mean, unfortunately, there were Jews who became other faiths. But in those communities, everybody was aligned. So the people who are coming to the Alter Rebbe are keeping kosher and Shabbos and davening and tzedakah and learning, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not the issue that they're facing. The issue they're facing is they feel, maybe extreme term, very dead inside about it. And their mouth is clutched. They've heard it. They've gotten all of the lectures. They've gotten all of the promises of things to come and the threats of how horrible it's going to be if they don't do the mitzvahs. And it is not meaningful to them. They've been physically oppressed in their circumstance, and they've been spiritually bereft. As we know, very few people really had an opportunity for a great spiritual meaning and understanding in their faith. So they're coming to the Alter Rebbe not because they don't know what to do when they put chicken soup in the cereal bowl. They're coming to him and saying, "Help me out here. I want to feel warmth, meaning, and closeness to the infinity of Hashem." And we tried all the things to say about how great it's going to be, and all the things it's going to do for you, and how it's going to make your life better, and how it's going to make your community better. And it's all true. And we, of course, genuinely believe that we could win the argument that our way is the Torah's way, is the best way that can be humanly appreciable for communal harmony, family harmony, business, and so on. And that was not enough for people. And so the Alter Rebbe said, okay, there is a jewel. There is something that is very precious. And what's so precious is how the mitzvahs affect Hashem. And this is something that we don't talk as much about. We talk about how the mitzvahs affect us. Sometimes in Torah, it even tells us. We say it every day in the second paragraph of the Shema. We'll do the mitzvahs, l'man yirbu yemechem, and you will live long, and your children will live long, and we're all for it. We say honor parents, and you'll live long. We're all for it. We say do mitzvahs, and there is reward, and the reward is a greater reward than material, and we're all for it. But what we don't talk as much about is how the mitzvahs affect Hashem. Later on in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe will quote from the Medrash, and it's one that we in the world of Chabad we talk about it all the time. The Medrash Tanchuma Parshas Nasai, which I can pretty much guarantee that before the Alter Rebbe made this the highlight, nobody knew what it said on the page before, no one had said on the page afterwards. It wasn't something that we knew. It's not like it says it on page 1 of Chumash, where it talks about the purpose of creation. Now, in the Gemara, it also talks about why did God create the world? And there are questions, there are answers that are suggested. God created the world because he is good and he longs to do good. It's intuitive to do good. Teva toiv lehitiv. It is the nature of good to do good. We say God created the world because he wanted to give us benefit and honor and reward. But those are all sort of presupposing that the world exists. What prompted Hashem to create the world? And in this medrash, which the Alter Rebbe describes, and again, this is much later on in Tanya, Zek kol ha'adam, this is the entirety of man, the tachlis briyaso, and the whole purpose of why he was created. Lios lo yisparech dirazoi betachtonim, to make for Hashem, a dwelling place in the naturally least sensitive places for godliness, the place that is least naturally intuitive for God. In other words, we're doing this for God. Now, some might say, well, what does God need from me? And the answer, of course, is, well, how could I possibly know? But God created the world because there's something that God is getting out of this. And since we don't presume God to be frivolous, so God creates the world because it must be very important. There's something in it for God. Now, this is a very dangerous idea, like crushing up the diamond. Because if a parent tells a child, do your homework, then you'll do well in school, the child might be motivated. But if the parent tells the child, I love you so much, I don't want to see you fail, and if you fail, it's going to hurt me so much. So not because the parent is concerned about themselves, but because they love the child so much. If you say this to the child might say, oh, so you want me to, because it's going to be meaningful. Well, I'll tell you what, it's like the kid, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to hold my breath. There can be a manipulation coming if we're not cautious about this. But the Alter Rebbe says, we're going to trust people. We're going to have tremendous respect for our readership. And you will see that in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe has tremendous respect for the people who are reading Tanya, because let's face it, why would someone bother to read Tanya unless they really were sincere about this and they weren't traveling all the way to Liadi, this little tiny speck of a village in Russia, to seek the Alter Rebbe's guidance to then go and ignore it. So they were sincere. And the Alter Rebbe believes that we, the readers of Tanya, and every Jew by extension, is genuinely sincere about wanting to have a deep, meaningful relationship with Hashem. And we're not just looking for, what do I got to do when I won't get yelled at? And as we'll see in the first chapter, if I ever get beyond my talking, if you just want to know, if a person just wants to know, am I going to go to heaven? So then Tanya is not going to be very meaningful to them. Keep a score sheet and get one more win than loss, one more mitzvah than avera, and you'll go to heaven. But the Alter Rebbe believes that that's not what we're here for. We're not doing this because we want to go to heaven. We are here to study Tanya because we want to have a deep and personal, meaningful relationship with Hashem. Now, the Alter Rebbe on the title page describes that the entirety of Tanya is based on one pasuk. It's a pasuk in the book of Devarim, where the pasuk says, Torah, the full context is, Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to the generation that did not leave Egypt. It's Devarim, that generation has died. This is not the generation that was at Sinai. That generation has died. And this is the generation that is going to go into the land of Israel without Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was not going into the land of Israel with them, as we know. And Moshe says to them, look, Torah is not in heaven. Then you should say, who shall go up to the heavens to retrieve it? And Torah is not across the sea. Then you should say, who will travel across the sea to retrieve it? Rather, it is very near to you. The matter is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. Now, what this suggests in the pasuk literally is, you don't have to say, if I was in a more heavenly circumstance, like living in the wilderness where manna rains down from heaven, and I have no concerns other than aligning myself with Hashem, then I can do mitzvahs. But I'm going to go into the land of Israel, and I'm going to have to be engaged in warfare, and I'm going to have to be engaged in setting up a community with government and markets and so on. I can't do Torah mitzvahs there. No, it is within you. And you can't say, well, if I lived in such a holy place, if I was born in a different time, if this, then I could serve Hashem. No, it is within you deeply and personally. Now, the Alter Rebbe is going to focus on this idea that it says it is not only karev, which again, the standard interpretation is nearby, like something a mile is closer than something 2 miles, but the Alter Rebbe is going to interpret that it is within you. Not just near to you, it is in your natural programming, that you may say it and that you may feel it. Now, this is really going to be where the struggle is. To say that it is within my capacity to do every mitzvah. Look, if I'm honest with myself, yes, I can get up, I can go and daven, I can resist the temptation to eat something that's not kosher. I can do that. I can do that. But to say that I should only feel it in my heart, remember the pasuk says, in your mouth, that is the verbal mitzvahs, and in your heart, to say I should only love Hashem, look, as we say, I may like doing something, that's not an Aveira. The Aveira is if I do it. So I may always be a lazy person, but if I in fact get up, how can the pasuk assert that it is within my capacity to only feel love for Hashem? It's in my capacity, yes, to do the right thing, even if I don't want to. But to say it's within my capacity, and not only karo, but miod, it's very close. It's like a little extra zinger. It's very close that I should feel only love for Hashem. That seems pretty hard. Yes, I can get myself to feel love for Hashem, but to only feel love for Hashem and not to feel love for indulgence and laziness and whatever other thing it is that I struggle with, that seems unreasonable to suggest. So it seems unreasonable to suggest. Now, the Alter Rebbe tells us, and he borrows a phrase from a story in the Talmud, that the pattern of Tanya is called, and this is a term that we'll refer to, the long, short way. What's the story? So there's a story about this author of the Mishnah, or the Gemara, and he says, I was once bested by a young boy. I was walking somewhere, and I came to a fork in the road. And I asked this young boy, which way to the city? And he told me there's 2 ways. There's the short, long way, and the long, short way. So I said, okay, what's the short, long way? So he says, go that way. So he says he goes that way, and sure enough, in a few steps, he's right outside the city, but there's a big giant wall. So you can't get into the city, but you're right there. So he comes back to the kid. He says, what is that? He says, well, right, it's short. You're right there, but it's long to get in. What's the long, short way? You have to walk all the way around. But when you walk all the way around, you walk right in through the gates. What is the analogy here? So again, every community has been struggling since Matan Torah. How do we keep people engaged and meaningful and thoughtful and enthusiastic about the service of Hashem? This is a classic struggle, and everybody is trying to solve the problem. So there are many short, long ways. The short, long way is the various types of stimulation. It is a way of serving Hashem. And later on in chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe addresses it because, look, I can't always wait. Sometimes it's urgent. And it's like an emergency. And if you're going to tell me I have to wait until I've completely, entirely figured it all out, meanwhile, life is going to go by. So what is the short, long way? So it is to, I'll use this term, to zap our emotional enthusiasm, to appeal to our enthusiasm for the service of Hashem, and that will get me over the hump. What's the downside of that? So again, I use this word, it's a little irreverent, but like any gimmick, it's good to get you going. It's like a sale. So yes, you make a sale and more customers come in, but once the sale is over, the customers are not coming back. They're waiting for the next sale. And in the same sense, in our Yiddishkeit, we get all excited and then it's passed and okay, what's the next one? And I'm going to need another one and another one and another one. So again, it is a mechanism to serve Hashem. special events help get us enthusiastic. But it ends, and when it ends, the enthusiasm goes with it. What is the ultimate, the strategy which the Alter Rebbe lays out for us, which he describes as the long, short way? And this is the teaching of Chabad. And it begins with a premise that we can always control what we willfully think about. I may not be able to control what passes through my field of vision, what catches my eye, but I can control what I'm going to sit and consciously think about. And if I think about the infinity of Hashem, that can always get me to feel a desire to be close with Hashem. Yes, I may also like sitting on the couch, but I can get enough love for Hashem, enough to get me over the hump and get the job done. Yes, I may still feel the interest and the desire in trivial matters and self-indulgent matters, but I can engage my intellect to overcome that resistance and that capacity to always think about the infinity of Hashem is in fact always within my control. And again, this is one of the truisms which the Alter Rebbe asserts, that a person can always control what they willfully think about. Again, I can't control what I like, but I can control what I willfully think about. Now, as you are familiar, this is called the book of the intermediate man, Beinoni. And as we'll note in the first chapter, the Alter Rebbe disrupts a common understanding, not that it's wrong, but it's a different perspective about these terms, a tzaddik and a Beinoni and a rasha. Historically and socially, we refer to a tzaddik as a really great guy, a super guy, the nicest guy you ever met. And a rasha as Haman, a rasha, the most wicked, evil guy that you could imagine. And a Beinoni is an average guy. And that is an accurate term when we're thinking about end of days. You know, when the guy's going to go in the up elevator, the down elevator, whatever it may be. But that's not where our focus is. And so we are going to be using these words in a vastly different manner. So much so that even the Alter Rebbe says, we don't really think you're going to ever be a Beinoni. Halavai Beinoni. It's an aspiration. Because the way we're going to define it, which is going to be meaningful in our moment to moment, not in our end of days, not in our scorekeeping, but in our moment to moment, the term Beinoni is going to mean something vastly different. The Alter Rebbe references the historical precedent because, you know, in Jewish life, we're very, very suspicious of anything we never saw before, anything that looks new. You know, there is the halacha called chadash, yashan and chadash. It has to do with the laws of wheat harvesting. And it became a saying that chadash is prohibited from the Torah. The Torah prohibits chadash, the new wheat. You have to have yashan, the old wheat. So this became a colloquialism. Anything new, we get very suspicious because we've had some bad experiences with people who show up. I have the new way. You know, we've run into some very bad experiences. So the Alter Rebbe, like any scholar, has to base his writings on something of a little more solid ground. So the Alter Rebbe mentions that this is based on Svarim, books, which is Rambam, as we mentioned, the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Shio Horowitz, the Shalah Kadosh, and so on. You know, so you're on some solid ground there. And he writes that it's also from Soifrim, oral teachings that were passed on, because again, writing something down runs a tremendous risk of misunderstanding. And the Baal Shem Tov, who he's referring to here, and the Baal Shem Tov student, who was the Alter Rebbe's teacher, Reb Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mizrich, and Reb Mendel Vitebsk, who the Alter Rebbe was a colleague of, and they had correspondence. Reb Mendel Vitebsk, went to Eretz Yisrael in that original colony that Chabad began in the late 1700s, still exists to this day, the Koil Chabad. And he mentions them there, that they also are sort of source material for his writings. And again, the long way is through engaging the intellect to shape the heart. The short sort of spurt way is that we're just going to appeal right to the emotion and we're going to crowd out anything else. And as the Alter Rebbe will talk about, it requires a lot of patience. So one lesson of Tanya is like one piano lesson. You get a little tiny taste, but don't think you're going to play the piano after one lesson. And the Alter Rebbe sort of makes it clear this is a long haul investment. It's long short. As an example of that, I mentioned that the Alter Rebbe writes that the whole of Tanya is based on this one pasuk in the book of Devarim, Ki karev elecha, behold, this matter is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. Now, we might expect that page 1 of Tanya is going to say, okay, there is this pasuk, and you're familiar with this style of Torah study. Here's an idea, seems perfectly harmless. Here's a contradictory idea, and here's a solution. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's not what's going to happen here. We're not even going to mention this pasuk until chapter 17, because the Alter Rebbe has to lay out the background. And again, this is why it takes a long, short way, and it takes patience and stick-to-itness. Again, one piano lesson will give you a sense of what the piano sounds like, but nobody anticipates that they're going to play a song after one piano lesson. So the Alter Rebbe begins Tanya by disrupting, or as we would say, disequilibrating us from our common presumptions. It's much like why much of Torah always begins with a question, because if I don't have a question, I'm not really open to anything. I know that one, I know that one, I know that one. And this is one of the difficulties in the fact that we're always learning Torah, because we might think, oh, I know that one, I know that one. And I imagine every one of us has hopefully had the experience where you're learning the Parsha and you go, well, I never noticed that before. I'm learning the Parsha 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. That's a new insight. Now, either it's a new insight because I just didn't come across that one. I mean, we all have limited time. Or maybe I wasn't really receptive to this. It wasn't as meaningful to me because where I was last year and 30 years ago is not where I am now. And so this message resonates with me in this environment and in this circumstance at this time in a way it didn't resonate with me when I saw the same thing 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 40 years ago. And again, we've all, I hope, have had such an experience. Well, the same thing can be said with the understanding of Tanya. We come to it, each one of us, from our own life experience. And whatever it is that we're going through now is not what we were going through 20 years ago. And the Alter Rebbe makes the very, very bold statement that he has embedded within this writing the answer to all of our spiritual questions. I mean, that's a very bold statement. And if we are receptive to it and we have the patience to go through it, because again, it's not going to be an instantaneous set of answers. And as in our style, which is I talk too much, we will go through it step by step, word by word. And again, the Alter Rebbe, as I mentioned, reviewed the entire Tanya before he made even the slightest grammatical adjustment. So we too will try to go through that and see where the core message is. And as we are just commemorating Yud Tes Kislev, the Alter Rebbe spent 53 days in Tsarist prison. It's not a nice place. I've actually been to that prison, the Peter Paul prison. It's a museum now. And there's a big arch and there's a sign, it's in Russian, but they translated that this was called the Gates of Death. This was not like a nice prison where Rabbi Shimon brings you pastrami sandwiches. This is a really bad place. And the Alter Rebbe spent 53 days not knowing if there's going to be a day 54. And the understanding amongst Chassidim is the 53 chapters of Tanya. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it in this chapter that the Alter Rebbe went to jail for? What's the chiddush? What's so radical about this? It doesn't seem that radical. It seems pretty, another lesson. Everyone's got a lesson. So I'll finish off with one more thought, and then we'll finally start learning some Tanya. I apologize. When we talk about the history of our people, and we begin with Avram Avinu, and we know how Nimrod threw Abraham in the fire and so on, we ask the question, what is everybody so upset with Avram for? Everybody at that time had a god. Avram's father, Terach, made gods. So this guy had his god, everyone had that god. And everybody said, my God is the best God. So Avram came along, he said, no, my God is the best God. So why are they so angry at him specifically more than everybody else? And we explain that the difference that Avram, and by extension we would say that Torah has brought to the world, in contrast to everybody else, and in a certain sense, why it is that they're so hateful of the Jews. What do they care about the Jews? Everyone's got the message. Everyone thinks their way is the right way. What's the difference? That everybody else said, my God is the best God because he will provide the best things for me. He will make my crops grow. He will make my children healthy. He will make me healthy, strong, whatever it is. So the next guy comes along and says, no, my God will do the better thing. Yahan, everybody fight about it. Who cares? Everybody understands that. Just like we used to have a Palm Pilot, then we had a BlackBerry, then we had and now we have the iPhone. Do I care? Which one works the best? I like this, you like that. What do I care? Avram Avinu comes along and he says, no, you have this backwards. Hashem is the creator of the world. So I don't care who created the iPhone. I just care that it works. Avram says, no, you got it. We're here to serve Hashem. Oh, what do you mean? God is here to serve me. I worship this God. He makes my crops grow. You got a bit different God? I'll worship that God to make my crops grow. I don't care. I just want my crops to grow. I want my phone to work. Which one works better? BlackBerry, BlackBerry. Palm Pilot, Palm Pilot. I don't care. Avram says, no, you got it upside down. I'm not campaigning that my God is better than your God because my God is going to do better things than your God. I'm telling you that the mission is for us to serve Hashem. And that they did not like at all. Because that disrupts the entire outline of how they determine whose God is the best God. You telling me that my life is designed to be of service? What are you talking about? The guy we respect the most is the guy who doesn't do anything. I got someone to mow my lawn. I hired someone else to read to my children. I hired someone else to do this for me. I don't do anything. I deserve, I don't serve. And Abraham Avinu and Torah, by extension, is here saying, no, you got it upside down. We don't revere the person who is served. We revere the person who serves. Don't tell me how much you get. Tell me how much you give. That's what we revere. That's what life is about. Of serving, not of being served. Oh, they did not like that. And this, by extension, is the story of the Jewish people. We're not here to stay saying, well, if you do this, you'll go to heaven. So I do this, I won't go to heaven. So I won't go to heaven. So many stories about the Tzaddik. They came and they gave a family a bracha, and the heavenly voice said, you forfeited your olam haba. He says, great, now I don't have to think about it. Now I know I only serve Hashem for Hashem. I'm not doing it because I'm going to get points, because I'm going to win. I'm doing it to serve Hashem. So whatever is necessary, in that sense. Okay, my long introduction here. I apologize. It's an occupational hazard. We're going to at least jump in and get a little bit of Tanya. Perek Aleph Tanya. Stop! You're going too fast. Now, the word Tanya, which is what we call it, although the Alter Rebbe called it the Book of the Intermediate Man, the word Tanya is a term that is very common. It means something that we learned in a Mishnah. The word Mishnah is a reference to the original writing down of the oral law, which was literally oral, until Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, realized that it's at risk of being lost, and so he wrote it down in little snippets. Now, the term for something that is learned in a Mishnah is masninon, mem taf nun yud nun nun, masninon. Sorry. So a person who is an author or something which is learned in the Mishnah is a Tana or Tanya. Tanya means we learned it in a Mishnah. Although this isn't even a Mishnah. This is really mentioned in the Gemara the way we have it. But the Alter Rebbe wanted to touch upon this idea of Tanya, which is made up of the letters Taf Nun Yud Aleph, each of which is the prefix for the future. Telech, Nelech, Yelech, Elech. If you remember from fourth grade grammar, Dikduk, about how we transform a verb into the future. And in part, it adds this sort of the deeper dimension that we are learning something here about taking us to not the future in the sense that it's something that hasn't happened, but for marching forward in the service of Hashem. B'soif Perek Gimel Denida. It is learned in the end of the third chapter of the Masechta that's called Nida, which again, primarily, of course, deals with the halachas of Nida. But as the Gemara often does, it sort of wanders and it sneaks in amongst all of the legal debate and analysis, some of the greater philosophical questions of life, because nothing new under the sun. And people have always had these questions and challenges. We think that we invented science. The Tower of Babel was the first time when they said we can make bricks. We're not like you old-fashioned people who have to use rocks. And therefore, we build a tower. We don't need God. So we say, well, we can go to the moon and we have iPads and so on. Every generation is sure that they have figured it out, and everybody before them was a total Neanderthal. And, Steve Jobs did not invent computers. He made them accessible to us, and so on. So there's nothing new under the sun. In the times of the Talmud, people were struggling, and the times even in the wilderness, people were struggling. And look, we know just amongst us, the people who saw the greatest revelation of godliness at Mount Sinai built the golden calf. So we think, if I would have lived then, everything was perfect. It's always a challenge. Why? Because we have a godly soul and we have an animal soul. And the animal soul has not taken a day off. He is not conceding. Even when, as we'll learn later on, he lets you go to shul for Yom Kippur, it's only so he can rest up and get you afterwards. He's not going away. He's just resting, as we'll see. Mashbiya Moisai, they make him swear. Who is the they? So we'll learn what the oath is, and then we'll come back. Tehei tzaddik v'al tehei rasha. Be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha, which, as the Alter Rebbe will ask, well, that seems rather redundant. If I tell you to make a right turn, I don't have to say, and don't make a left turn. So obviously, if you're a tzaddik, you're not a rasha. Even if the whole world is telling you you're a tzaddik. Be in your eyes, and here's the kicker, that's the key word, like Rasha. Now, who is swearing? Who is being administered this oath? What is the Gemara referring to here? So the Gemara is referring to a neshama before it is sent down into this world. So we know that if I'm a neshama, I don't want to go into this world. The world is filled with material concerns, and the human body wants to eat, and it's clamoring for attention, and it wants to do indulgent things, and certainly even some bad things. And the neshama is like, I don't want to go. I'm up here with the infinity of Hashem. Who wants to go down there into the world? And this is a not uncommon phenomena that we experience throughout all of Torah. Noah doesn't want to leave the ark. Who wants to leave the ark? And the ark is safety. The ark is godly protection. And out there, it's a big, bad, evil world. The Yidden don't want to leave the wilderness. Who wants to leave the wilderness and go into the land of Israel? Here we got manna from heaven. We got the divine cloud. We got the Mishkan. We got Moshe Rabbeinu. Who wants to go out there? The kid who doesn't want to leave yeshiva. It's lovely here. I spend all day studying Torah. This is nice. My father pays for everything. This is beautiful. Who wants to go to work? Who wants to go out there? But the mission is, like this neshama, to make the world a godly place. And the world is not going to be a godly place with neshamas up in heaven. The Gemara tells us that Mashiach will come when all the neshamas are emptied out into the world. What does that mean? Obviously, we should have more and more Yidden, more and more children. And the idea is that we're not changing the world if we're just going to, pull our talus over our head and hide from the world. But it's a hard thing. So the angels call in this neshama, and they say, listen here, Sparky, I want you to swear. Swear that you'll be righteous and not evil. So the neshama is like, what do you want from me? I'm on your side. I'm all for it. What do you make the goof swear? Why are you making me swear? I'm all about it. I'm on that side. I want to do godliness. So the neshamas are being told, hey, this is what you say now when you're up in heaven and you're surrounded only by godliness. You're going to go down into the physical world. You're going to see that you're going to have to really be committed to something far greater. One of the beautiful things is when you ask a small child in the yeshiva, what is a quarter? He says, oh, that's for tzedakah. Some people use that to buy things. Really? I thought the whole purpose of money is to put it in the pushka. Why do you have water? So you can wash your hands for bread. People use it for other things. Who knew? So that's the neshama. It's beautifully naive. It's stunned. What do you mean you don't want to do mitzvahs? Where you have to put on tefillin today. You didn't know that? What do you mean? Oh, okay, let me help you. What do you mean you don't want to? Everyone wants to. Just like nobody wants to be sick. Why do people eat potato chips? Whatever. Unfortunately, we can come up with an excuse for doing things that are unhealthy. We justify it, we minimize, whatever it is, as we will unfortunately discuss about how clever that animal soul is in getting us to indulge ourselves. And again, unless the person's a sociopath, nobody thinks they're doing something evil. They think, what do you mean? I tried it. We have excuses. So we're telling you, listen here, Neshama, it's not going to be as easy as you think. What is the role of swearing? So we'll have it coming up, actually, before Yaakov Avinu dies. He makes Yosef swear that he will bury him in Eretz Yisrael and not in Mitzrayim. So why does he make Yosef swear? Don't you trust me? So there's all kinds of explanations. We know maybe Yaakov feared that Yosef resented the fact that Rachel was not buried in the cave of Machpelah. But okay, really, you think Yosef is going to take revenge on his father? So we know that when Yosef dies, tells the people to bury him temporarily in Mitzrayim, and then when Hashem will take us out, you'll take my bones out with you, as we read about later, that Moshe Rabbeinu takes Yosef's bones out with him. Why is Yosef buried in Mitzrayim? Because he says, temporarily, this will give the people confidence. They'll know that I believe so certainly that Hashem will take us out of Mitzrayim that I'm willing to allow myself to be buried here temporarily until that time will come. So Yosef might have thought, I got an idea. Same thing with Yaakov. What does Yaakov want more than anything? Like every father and grandfather wants. He wants his children to be happy. So imagine how meaningful it will be for the people if we'll bury Yaakov temporarily in Mitzrayim. The people will see this is where the Tzaddik is, because he's so certain that he's going to eventually be buried in the cave of Machpelah that he's even willing to be temporarily buried in Mitzrayim. It's a good idea. And Yaakov says, don't have any good ideas. When you swear, it means you can't edit this. Don't change it. This is how it has to be. And then Yaakov knows that Paro is not going to be so down with this, as we see in the Parsha. And Paro only agrees because, as he says to Yosef explicitly, because you swore to your father. So when a person swears, it has a number of consequences. One, it means you can't change it. Even as smart as you are, you can't change it. That's A. B, it gives you, like the word soveya, it gives you strength. It satiates you with extra strength to do it. When a person swears to do it, that means he is not going to allow anything to get in his way. It's going to require a dogged commitment till the point, as we call it, of Mesiras Nefesh, total surrender of self. So this poor neshama who lives up in Shemayim with holiness all around him, he's being sent into a deep, dark, unpleasant place in this physical world, encased in this body that wants to eat and sleep and do all this stuff. It doesn't want to do godly stuff intuitively. And you got to drag him there like a mother dragging her kid shoe shopping. He doesn't want to go. But the neshama is told, you got to swear, because that's what's going to give you that energy. That's what's going to give you that drive to do it. And what should you swear? To be a tzaddik. And then don't be a Russia. So as we'll ask much later on in Tanya, well, obviously, if I'm a tzaddik, I'm not a Russia. Like I said, if I tell you to make a right turn, I don't say, oh, don't make a left turn. One negates the other. So what the Alter Rebbe will explain is our aspiration is tzaddik. Now that's really a sort of letting us off the hook. Because the oath is to be a tzaddik. But as we'll explain, tzaddik is kind of out of our reach. In fact, the Alter Rebbe wrote a book called the Sefer Shel Tzaddikim. This is the Sefer Shel Beinoni, the book of the intermediate man. The Alter Rebbe did write a Sefer called the Sefer Shel Tzaddikim. But as unfortunately, as we know in our history, not only with the Alter Rebbe, but so many others, there was a pogrom or a fire or something. That's it. It's lost. You know, it was literally written, and that's it. It was gone. It was gone. And the Alter Rebbe took this as a sign that this is not something that the world really is ready for, because the tzaddik is the rarest of the rare. And again, as we will explain it, you know, with the parameters of Talmud and so on, it's not just making it up off the top of our head. This term called tzaddik can have multiple meanings, much like the word hot. You know, the oven is hot, it's 400 degrees. It's hot outside, It's 80 degrees. Well, which is hot 80 degrees or is hot 400 degrees? Well, it depends on the context. Well, what does tzaddik mean also depends on what the context is in which you are using it. And so ultimately, what the Alter Rebbe will explain, the oath suggests is you should aspire to tzaddik, meaning how many sins you're allowed to do every day. Of course, zero. You're not allowed to do any. So if every day you should say, I'm going to do 0 sins today. At the end of the day, if you did more mitzvahs than sins, we call that a good day. But we don't start off the day and say, I believe today I can do 5 sins. Imagine if you would meet somebody who says, I believe in life, you can lie 5 times. So everything he says is this one. Now, imagine a person at the end of their life saying, my whole life, I lied 5 times. We might say, oh, that's pretty impressive. But if for somebody who has a philosophy that you can lie 5 times, every time they say something, is this one of those times? This one, you don't know. So one thing that's absolutely intolerable is to be a Russia. So the oath is twofold. And then we give you what's called an Eitzah Tova, a good idea, a good suggestion, a strategy. That even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, you should be in your eyes like a Russia. So why is the whole world telling me a tzaddik? Because I fooled them all? You know, like that bumper sticker that says, Dear God, please let me be the person my dog thinks I am. So I fooled everybody. That's why they tell me a tzaddik. Why? Why do they think I'm a tzaddik? Because, and this is a classic illustration, what we see from the guy is he always does mitzvahs. But we don't know what's going on. You know, it's like saying, oh, it's easy for you. Why is it easy? You get an A on every test. It's easy for you. You don't know it's easy. The person is struggling and studying and reviewing. What I can see, the world, not because the world is lying or naive, what they can see, that's all I can see. All I can see is the product. So the whole world sees the person and all they see is mitzvahs. That's all they can see. So they tell him, wow, this guy's a tzaddik. You know, first of all, who asked them to say? But it comes sometimes internally. Internally, we say it ourselves. We start to see ourselves that way. I'll never do that again. You know, a classic thing. You know, a kid sucks his thumb. He turns 4 or 5 years old. He stops sucking his thumb. That's it. And when he's 42, he's going to say, well, I'm going to suck my thumb again. That's it. You know, he's outgrown it. It's past him and so on. But as we know, we wind up, upgrading our maturity and upgrading our temptations because our animal soul is not going away. So he used to want to, whatever it was, sleep late. Now he wants to do other crazy things. Whatever, he's not going away. He's also trying to keep pace with you. So even though you feel like I am tzaddik because I have completely solved that problem, whatever that problem is, be in your eyes, and here's the key word, kirusha, like the Russia. Not that you are a Russia, and that's going to be very important as I'm sort of giving away the answer. But this is what the Gemara says, like a Russia. What does it mean that I'm like a Russia? That I am as vulnerable to temptation. That I have not solved my nefesh habahamis. I have merely stemmed it at that moment. But it's like weather. You know, the weather, it gets warm, it's going to get cold again. Meaning my nefesh habahamis has not gone away. Even though I have quieted it, it isn't going away. I am still like the Russia. I am vulnerable to spiritual temptation, even though I've solved it. And again, it's like, why do we still have prison guards? There hasn't been a prison escape in 50 years. Let all the guards go home. Well, obviously, you let your guard down, the prisoners are all going to escape. And we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that we are immune to any temptation. All right, we'll stop here. We got through some. And